So I'm continuing in the theme, and if I haven't hit any of you yet, probably I'll get you tonight. There's kind of four different big flaws I think that ministers deal with, and this one is very common. And I'm picking on the Apostle Paul tonight because I was just doing a life group study with my own life group, and we covered a passage that really kind of, I'd read it before, but it shocked me a bit, out of Galatians. We'll get to it in a minute. But I see Paul having an issue with being driven, or another word is a workaholic. Now, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because I think he had lost time to make up. He had persecuted God's church and God's people. And I believe he was on a mission of redemption to some degree. He was trying to make up for what the damage he had done to God's church and God's people. So he didn't have a lot of time to spare. I think his whole life was given to ministry, but that can be seen as worthy and worthwhile effort, but also it comes with troubles. So, and of course, I remind you that I speak with a wee bit of exaggeration to make my point, pastorally speaking. So you're fine to disagree with me all you like. This is my opinion and my interpretation. Take it for what it's worth, but I do speak from the heart, and frankly, I see all four of these characters' issues in my life to some degree. So this one I've had to deal with also. So I look at the many phrases in Paul's letters that point to someone that has a driven personality, or one that rarely rests because of all the work he has to do. I think he was trying to make up for lost time, and he didn't have a lot of time to spare. He didn't know how long his life would be, so every hour, every minute, I think, was devoted to discipling people, training leaders, putting in place elders, equipping, evangelizing, starting new churches. That was his task as apostle to the Gentiles. And I see I'm reading it from that perspective in 1 Corinthians 9:24. You know that many runners enter a race, and only one of them wins the prize. So run to win. I think Paul was running to win. Athletes work hard to win a crown that cannot last, but we do it for a crown that will last forever. My brother-in-law he's a teacher in high school, and he's in a last chance school. In other words, all of his students have been kicked out of other schools. And if they don't make it in his school, they're kicked out of the system altogether. So his program is based on athletics. They run 13 kilometers a day in his program every day, and they go on marathons. He's taken some of the youngest runners to the Seattle Marathon that's ever run. His son actually, even though it's illegal to be under 15 years old, his son at 9 years old finished the marathon ahead of a lot of other people this last year in Vancouver, Sun Run. He's taken his class to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. These are latchkey kids. They're native Indian kids in the inner city with one parent and the other parent, or one alcoholic parent. People donating money to them usually get spent on alcohol instead of on the kid for clothing. But I can see him, he runs marathons all the time, and I see him inspiring his kids. I see Paul trying to inspire us to run. I don't run without a goal, he says, and I don't box by beating my fists in the air. I keep my body under control and make it a slave so I won't lose out after telling the good news to others. He's almost out of breath. No doubt he accomplished a great deal. But I think that when you're a driven person, it's easy to become harsh and impatient with others who are not so driven. And this is what kind of caught my attention in Galatians chapter 5. You were running the race beautifully. Who cut in on you and stopped you from obeying the truth? He was dealing with some legalist people. He was dealing with those that promoted to be a good Christian, you had to also follow the law of circumcision. So he says, such an influence does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast spreads through the whole batch of dough, Galatians 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm confident in the Lord that you will take no other view of this. However, this is where I find him a little bit harsh. I don't know about you. The one who is troubling you will suffer God's judgment, whoever he is. And as for me, brothers, if I'm still preaching the necessity of circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. He says, I wish those that are upsetting you would castrate themselves. You're like, that's a little harsh, Paul. But I think you see, someone's messing with his work. Someone is undermining him and destroying all of the hard work that he has done. And he's frustrated that someone would come in and ruin things. So when is it okay to be harsh with your people? When can you publicly tell your people that they should castrate a troublemaker? This is in the text forever. Paul, I think he went a little far, and we have proof. At times he went even beyond what God had told him and put his own opinion as gospel truth. And this still bothers me a wee bit. And I try to be very fair to the text and a good student of the authority of the Scripture. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 8. Paul is waxing eloquent about unmarried widows and women's roles, and he says, I therefore to the unmarried and to the widows say, it's good for you to remain as I am, single. But if you do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. And to the married I command, not I, but the Lord, a woman not to be separated from her husband. But if she is indeed separated, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband, and the husband is not to leave his wife. And here's what bothers me a little bit. But to the rest I say, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who does not believe, I'll just stop there. Paul felt that because Jesus had not specifically addressed this topic, that Paul's opinion was to be considered a command to the church. I'm not saying it's less authoritative necessarily. I have a little trouble. The danger I see is this. Have you ever been too busy to pray? Got a lot of stuff going on. You're working hard. You're juggling 10 things at one time. Demands are on you, and you've got to come to some decisions. And instead of taking time to stop and pray, you just go with your opinion instead of seeking the Lord's opinion. You give your opinion to the church to make a decision, but you actually have never even asked God what He thinks. Do you ever think that because you have been in ministry for a very long time and have had many positions of influence, or because so many people seek your advice and wisdom, that you can speak on behalf of God without asking Him directly? It's a lot easier, it's a lot faster if you don't pray. Just give your opinion. It's kind of what I'm saying, that I think Paul, not that he overstepped the bounds, but there's a danger in speaking for God without actually checking with God first. That's what happens when we're too busy, when we don't have time to stop. Sometimes when we are working extra hard for God, we can also be impatient with those who are not working much at all. I see this in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. It's kind of fun because I see Paul's frustration coming out. He's working hard. He's given his whole life. Everything he does is not me who lives, it's Christ who lives in me, and I'm running the race hard, and you should be running. You've got to run to win the race. He says, my friends in Corinth, you are acting like people of this world. That's why I could not even speak to you as spiritual people. You are like babies as far as your faith in Christ is concerned. It says, I had to treat you like babies and feed you milk. You could not even take solid food, and you still can't. Shame on you, kind of thing. Because you are not even spiritual. You are jealous and argue with each other. It proves that you're not even spiritual and that you are acting like people of this world. Have you ever wanted to just say that to your people? I heard of a pastor who took his Bible and said, well, clearly you don't even believe this stuff. He rips a page out of his Bible, and you don't believe this because you don't do it either. He rips it out and started tearing pages out of the Bible of things that his church didn't do and didn't follow and didn't believe. And of course he was fired that day by his church for destructing the Bible. Paul is saying, what's wrong with you? You argue and fuss and are jealous and are acting childish. Grow up already. You're not even acting like Christians like you say you are. I see this as a frustrated pastor who is working hard, who's doesn't have time to waste, and he doesn't want to backtrack and start over again with people that should know better, grow up, act your age, be Christian. Impatience with others is often the characteristic of a workaholic. But another characteristic is pride. With Paul, pride was a problem. He admits it. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He must have had a problem with pride, because look at all the stuff he's done. Look at all the people he's led to the Lord, all the churches he's started. He's even been to the third heaven or something, wherever that is. 2 Corinthians 12:7 says, "But to keep me from being puffed up with pride, because of the many wonderful things I've seen," his words, "I was given a painful physical ailment, which acts as Satan's messenger to beat me and keep me from being proud. 3 times I prayed to the Lord about this and asked him to take it away, but his answer was, 'My grace is all you need, for my power is greatest when you are weak.'" And it's funny because, I'll read the rest of it, you know it. "I am most happy then to be proud of all my weaknesses in order to feel the protection of Christ's power over me. I'm content with my weakness and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties for Christ's sake." It's like he's saying, even when I'm weak, I am strong. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I'm super Christian in some way. Of course, yes, I'm exaggerating, but it's fun. Those of you who've been in ministry for a long time, do you get more gentle with age, or do you get more impatient with your people? Any volunteers there?
More gentle.
More gentle? Do you understand people a lot better? You're more forgiving? I find I tend to be the more frustrated because, I don't have time to waste here. You guys get on board. Let's move. Why are we wasting time? I know what we should be doing. Why do you sit there, debate and argue and talk about all these things all this time? Why don't you just trust me to lead? But I don't consider myself a workaholic. My brother is. My dad is, but I said, I don't want to die early of a heart attack, so...
I think I get impatient when, especially that what you've mentioned, when I've been working with people maybe a longer time, and I think they should already be getting it, and then they don't. It's not that I'm impatient, it's from person to person. Some people, okay, I'll be patient, but some people I know they should have already gotten it, and then you still have to change the nappies and you get, grew up already.
I had a pastor, I was at a pastor's and wives retreat about 3 weeks ago, and he wanted to talk to me, and I'm sometimes suspicious when people ramble on and on and on and never actually have a question. They're telling me all of the things about them and all that they're doing, and I'm thinking, are they trying to impress me, or I don't know what's going on here? They're taking my time, but they're not actually asking anything. And so I interrupted him. I said, "Do you actually have a question?" And he said, "Well, he said something." I said, "Seriously? You know the answer to that?" And he left me a little confused because I didn't seem very patient, I guess. But I look at Paul, and I think sometimes when we're so busy, we're so stressed, we don't have time for the more needy sheep. I think that's what associate pastors are good for. You say, "Hey, would you give so-and-so a call? I don't really have time this week. Can you take care of this situation for me?" But I look at Paul is saying in Philippians 1:21, "For me to live is Christ and die is gain." And Galatians 2:20, "I've been crucified with Christ, and I live, yet no longer I, but Christ lives in me." And 4:13 in Philippians, "I can do all things through Christ." And he talks in Hebrews 12 about running the race that is set before us. And I just see a very driven person who doesn't stop. So I was with leading a conference with my brother and my father, and actually I think maybe, I don't remember if it was all my brother, my mother, my dad, and my brother. And we were doing, at the end of our conferences, we often just have a panel discussion on the stage, and we say, if you want to ask us some questions, write it down on paper, put it in a box, and we'll, at the end of the day today, we'll have the panel, we'll answer all your questions. And so invariably, the question almost always comes up, tell me about your devotional life. What do you do to develop your relationship with God? And my dad starts off by saying something like, well, I've learned over the years that if I don't get up by at least 5 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning every day, that I don't have time with the Lord. And I have a notebook, and I write down the things He tells me, and I have time in His Word, and then in prayer. And my brother says, yeah, I find too, like he used to go to work before everyone else, an hour before everyone else would show up at work. So we would have an hour of quiet time, uninterrupted by phone calls and other staff and whatnot. He just needed to be there early at 6 in the morning or something. And it came to me and I said, I like looking at the mountains. And I like walking by the streams. And I find that I don't have to be type A driven personality in order to know God. And I have this understanding that most of these devotional writers like Spurgeon and Oswald Chambers, they were all type A personalities that had to give up early and be disciplined. And I said, I'm not that guy. I wasn't designed like that. I can enjoy God as I'm driving my car down a highway and sing praises to Him. I'm not that, and at least 10 people in the audience that day came up to me and said, thank you for saying that. I've always tried to be the other person. It has never been me. I'm not driven. And I'm going, yeah, I'm not my dad, and I'm not my brother. I am who I am, and I have to come to God in a way that I can understand God, and God can reveal Himself to me. I learned that the church I pastor is not my church. It doesn't depend on me. It depends on God. It depends on me helping my people know God. We are part of a bigger kingdom where we all work together, where we have many who have gone before us and many who will come after us. I don't see it like a race. I have to finish the finish line. I see it like a relay race where I run my segment and I pass it off to the person coming after me. And I want to make sure that I pass it off in a strong way, that I have run faithfully. But it's not my job to finish the race. It's my job to do my part. I think Christ is our coach, and our Lord is causing everything to work together for good. And I think too many driven people feel like it all depends on them. It's all up to them if it's going to work. I don't know if church planters are like that. Yes or no? What do you think? How many church planters here? I'm not a church planter personality, I admit that, so I don't know for sure, but I do know that a lot of church planters have a hard time letting go. They have a hard time passing responsibility off to church members. It's been all about them and their family and their drive, and they were there early and they were there late, and they set it all up and they'll take it all down. And to release things into other people's hands and trust is really hard. To see the structure come and be built up is really tough sometimes because they have to let go. So Hebrews 4 talks about the remains, a Sabbath rest. Let me see if anything is helpful on here. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, Hebrews 4, 9, and 10, because the one who enters God's rest has himself rested from his own actions, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fail by following their example of disobedience. I think the rest he's talking about here, the Sabbath rest, is kind of a rest, not like at the end of the day when you go home from work and you put your feet up and get the newspaper out. It's like a rest after a long journey. It's like the people of Israel going through the desert time of 40 years and finally crossing the Jordan. They can now finally rest from the weary journey. Or Christ went all the way to the cross before he could finally say, it is finished, it's done, I've done my work. And so I think there's a Sabbath rest that we all have one day. But We act sometimes like it's all up to us. And when I started to look at this passage about this Sabbath rest after a long journey, what I realized is that Christ actually did the work for us. He did the work on the cross. His Spirit is now living in us. It's like we are actually in the Sabbath rest because Christ did the hard work. He did all the heavy lifting, and now we are coming alongside working with Him. But He's completed everything that needed to be done for our salvation. He's gone to prepare a place for us. We're in that in-between time where He's coming back. But we don't have to stress and be anxious and work ourselves to death for the kingdom. He's done that already. We need to be involved. We need to enjoy. Where's the abundant life come when I retire? When do I get to enjoy life? When I'm over 65, 70? I think there's work for us to do, raise our kids, renovate our houses. But the big tasks were already done by Jesus. We're not fighting Satan. Christ did that. Satan's defeated. Sometimes we forget that and we give Satan more power than he actually has in our situation. So, it's not ceasing from our labor that gives us rest. It's our belief in Christ. When we turn ourselves over into His hands and let Him fill us with His presence and lead us in His paths of righteousness and follow His commands, we can rest in Him without working ourselves to death. He says in Matthew 11:29, we've heard this already this week, place my yoke on you and learn from me because I am what? Gentle and humble, and you will find what? Rest for your souls, because my yoke is easy and pleasant, and my burden is light. Does that sound like we're supposed to be driven? Workaholics? I think some of us really try to honor God all the time in that regard. We have to work hard. You know, it's the kingdom work. I'm investing in the kingdom. And meanwhile, our families are struggling. Meanwhile, our children are hurting. So I mentioned this briefly the other day, but when I went to Norway it was the first time I was a senior pastor, and I worked really hard. I was going to be the best pastor they've ever had. I was busy. I was visiting, and we were having a women's retreat actually that weekend, one weekend, and my wife was preparing for a speaker to come up from Germany, and she had time with the Lord in the morning, and in her morning devotions, God says, I want you to spend time with your daughter today. And Kim says, I'm too busy. I've got to go to the airport to pick up a speaker. I've got all the details ready for this retreat this weekend. And the Spirit just kept telling my wife, you need to spend time with your daughter. So my wife's good at listening to God, and she called the school and asked that Aaron meet her out front of the school. Usually they take the school bus home. She picked Aaron up, and they went to the shopping mall. And on the way to the shopping mall, my wife was asking my daughter, how are things going? Because she still didn't really know why she's supposed to spend time with my daughter. And she says, fine. And she kept pressing, is there anything wrong? Is there anything going on at school that I should know about? And my daughter says, well, actually I have a friend who's cutting herself. And my wife said, who is it? And she says, I promised I wouldn't say anything. I can't tell you her name. But the Spirit just kept saying, press more. And so it was true that a friend was, but a lot of the girls in junior high were cutting themselves at this time, experimenting with it. And it came out that my daughter was too. And it really hit me hard because, and when you're, international situations, all your best friends get transferred away every 3 years or 2 years. And this was the year that all of my family's best friends were moved. And my daughter had just had enough of saying goodbye. She couldn't take it anymore. She was depressed. It wasn't, if you know about cutting, it's not a suicide thing. It's a way of dealing with pain. And we didn't know anything about it. It's the first thing we ever heard about. We did research, We found a good Christian website, and my daughter was just starting into this, and so she had only 3 small cuts. And we helped her through it, but it hit me as a dad because I'd always said my family came first, and I realized they weren't, that my church had come first, and that I was working so hard to help everyone else, I wasn't helping my own daughter. And that stopped me in my tracks. When you are not rested, you are not spiritually and physically, you are spiritually and physically and emotionally tired. Not just tired, but in every way. And it's hard to fight against temptation when you are not rested. It's easier to sin when your resistance is down. It's easier to dwell in the negative and unproductive and unfounded thoughts. It's easier to fall into depression and anxiety and paranoia and overreacting to people. So I started looking into Paul's life, and I thought, how did God make Paul rest? What's the picture on the screen there? Prison. Paul had to spend a couple of years in Caesarea in a prison. God stopped him completely. He couldn't preach, he couldn't teach, he couldn't disciple, he couldn't plant churches, he couldn't encourage other Christians. This Caesarea Philippi, we don't have a lot of information about it, but he was kept in limbo for no good reason for a couple of years. And I think he had time, like he said, God, what are you doing? I got to go plant churches. I got to go disciple people. I got to go train. I got to go teach. I got to write letters. I got to do, and God says, no, sit there. Just sit there. Just relax. 2 years he's sad, and he's supposed to be a Gentile missionary out there reaching people for the Lord. And God says, sit there. Not just for a month or a year, 2 years. Can you imagine? How frustrating, like Joseph in prison. What's going on, God? Just wait. It's not about you. It's about my plans. 2 years, twice he was in prison. In AD 61, he was arrested and sent to Rome for another 2 years. And what had happened in those 2 years? What letters did he write? Letter to Colossians, written to defeat the heresy that had risen in Colossae. He wrote to the Ephesus church, reflecting his concerns for his beloved church, that they would understand the great doctrines of the faith. He wrote to the Philippians, Paul's most joyful letter. References to his joy abound on the pages. The 4th prison letter was written to a friend, Philemon. It's a plea for forgiveness. I'm glad he was in prison in Rome. We wouldn't have had some very important letters, but God said, stop. You're done with the missionary journeys for now. Reflect. Rest. So as he was in Rome, it says he began to just look, he started to look around. Where can I have influence? Where can I have impact? It says that he was known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard in Philippians 1:13. The Praetorian Guard was the body of 10,000 specially trained soldiers of Rome. He was known throughout Caesar's household. Talk about having influence right to the top echelons of society, all because he stopped for a moment. He looked around to see where he could have influence. He wasn't traveling, he wasn't preaching, he was just being an ambassador for Christ. So if we're constantly responding to our buzzing phones, our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, emails, text messages, we're not resting either. If we're always jumping when everyone calls at the oddest times, we're not resting. We're preoccupied sometimes with perfection. We deal with anxiety. We're obsessed over issues, all of which talk about lack of trust in God. We have sometimes sin in our life. We're waiting to be found out, waiting for God to bring judgment. We're not resting because we can't let our guard down. Sometimes we're carrying burdens and heavy loads that don't belong to us. And Jesus keeps saying, come to me, you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Be still and know that I am God. Did you ever watch that movie City Slickers? old. It's been out for a long time. And in this movie, City Slickers, there's this old grizzled cowboy called Curly, and everyone's afraid of him. They're just terrified of this cowboy. So 3 city slickers decide to have this 2 weeks or something of an experience on a ranch driving cattle. And so they don't even know how to ride a horse. They're just totally out of their league. And they come along this grizzled cowboy who doesn't ever seem to sleep. He always stares into the distance. And eventually this curly guy says to one of the characters, Mitch, he says, do you know what the secret of life is? And Mitch says, no, what is it? Curly holds up his finger, and Mitch says, your finger? He says, no. He says, the secret is one thing. And Mitch says, what is that one thing? And Curly replies, that's what you have to find out. You stick to that and everything, I won't say the rest because there's a swear word in the line. Everything else don't mean something. And I started to think, and this is my own philosophy, I don't know if this is true or not, maybe you can help me out. But I started to look at people's lives throughout the scripture. I looked at Moses and Noah and Jesus and Paul, Mary, Jeremiah, David. And I started to notice that they all had one thing that they were noted for. Moses led the people out of Egypt. Noah had a job to collect animals and care for them for nearly a year in the ark. Paul was to spread the gospel among the Gentiles. Mary was to be the mother of Jesus. Jeremiah was to faithfully speak the words of God to his people. David, a little bit more complicated, but he was that Renaissance man and did a little bit of everything, but he was to be the king. Jesus, one thing was to head to the cross. And I started to think, I wonder if we're all supposed to be known for one main thing. One thing in our life that we stand out for. Maybe we're a godly person. Maybe we're a wise counselor. Maybe we were a great church planter. Maybe we were whatever it is that we were called to do. And sometimes we're so busy doing so many things, we never focus on the one main thing God called us to do. My dad's known for writing Experiencing God. His whole subsequent ministry has been related to that. My brother wrote a book called Spiritual Leadership, and he's constantly helping people in areas of leadership. Maybe our workaholic tendencies come out of when we are trying to do everything well and we lose sight of that one thing. So I do know that God sometimes gives pastors heart attacks and strokes, a cancer diagnosis, whatever it is. Sometimes he says, stop. Be still. And some pastors can't handle that. They have to be busy. They have to be working all the time. They can't rest. And they're trying to prove something to somebody, but I'm not quite sure who. And they don't know actually how to rest. I don't know if I'm gonna. There he is. Old Curly and Mitch.
One thing.
One thing. So a couple of slides left here. What's down in the well comes up in the bucket. Kind of makes sense, but as a pastor, we got a bucket, I believe, when we enter into ministry. I think Jesus kind of hands us a bucket. And it's our job to draw from the well. And if you're not spending time, I think there's 4 components to this bucket. One is the Word, and one is prayer, and one is fellowship, and one is worship, I'd say. These are 4 important components that you need to have filling your bucket in order to really fit well into the place God has for you in ministry. So one last picture of a well. What do you notice about this particular well? What's wrong with the bucket?
There's a hole.
There's a hole in the bucket. Yeah, I know that song. So There's a lot of things, we're staying with the metaphor of this bucket in the deep well. There's a lot of things that can put holes in the bucket, that leak out your joy, that leak out your confidence in God, that leak out your ability to serve with full strength. And I think that staying in the Word and staying in prayer and staying in fellowship and staying in worship covers that hole. But any time that we fall away from those core elements of what keeps us filled as servants of God, we create holes in our bucket and it leaks out.